Okay, first I'm going to give you an example and go through the supplies you need. And then at that point, you're going to stop the tape, get your supplies together, and then you'll start back up again. What we're going to be doing is creating a little still life of 3 pumpkins that look more realistic than just ovals and circles painted in green. So that's what we're going to do. The type of paint I'm using and what my students will be using is called Tempera Cakes. It's tempera paint that is made into a solid cake that you add water to. If you don't have tempera cakes, that's fine. You can do this in crayon, colored pencil, watercolors, oil pastels, chalk pastels, anything you want to use. You're going to do the same steps, only in whatever media you decide to use. So what you'll need is paints. If you're using water-based paints, you'll need all your water-based supplies. You're going to need a palette of some kind to mix paint in. You're going to need a container of water and backup water. So either be able to stop the tape and go and get clean water, or go ahead and get 2 containers. You'll need rags. I always use some old towels and paper towel, and I reuse my paper towel several times because as long as there's a clean space on it, it'll dry and can be reused. I'll be using a black oil pastel. You can use crayons in lieu of the pastels. You just may have to go over your lines a few times to make them a little bit darker. You'll need a pencil, an eraser. For my students, I want them to use their Kneadable Erasers, also called a gum eraser. If some of my students have a new package, and what they need to do is open up the little package of kneaded eraser and break off a piece of it. You don't need the whole big glob. And the way you use this is go ahead and start stretching it, which is why it's also called gum eraser. My high school art teacher always called it gum eraser. And it cleans itself. That's what this type of eraser does. It also does not leave anything behind, so you don't get any shreds of eraser like you do with this type of eraser or a white eraser. And it literally lifts the pencil off the paper instead of grinding on the surface of the paper to remove it. So that's a kneaded eraser. You'll also need paint brushes if you're using paint. I'm using a 12 by 18 sheet of watercolor paper. If you're using a water-based paint, you need watercolor paper. This is a lighter weight watercolor paper because the heavier weight is more expensive, and since these are just my demonstrations, I don't want to use the expensive paper. But you need something that has some weight to it so it can deal with the water that it has to absorb throughout the water coloring process. And tempera paint is still considered a water-based paint because you use water as your medium for it, your mixing medium. So if you're using a large piece of paper, you need large brushes. What you don't want to do is take a large paper and then use some teeny tiny little brush. Number 1, will leave streaks everywhere. Number 2, it will take you literally forever to finish a painting, and it will not look as good as it will if you use a larger eraser. And something else for people at home, especially kids, parents, these Crayola brushes are really good brushes. I know that you look at them and think, oh, well, it's just Crayola, but Crayola makes good products. And I buy these for my students to use at home, and I buy them for them to use in the studio because they hold a lot of pigment. They wash well, they don't feather, the bristles don't fall out. They are very nice quality brushes and a very nice price. So that's why I am very big on using Crayola brushes. They last a long time. and they do a great job. Okay, so what you'll need to do is stop the tape, get your supplies, and come back. And I'm going to, and when you come back, we're going to pick up where you left off at beginning our lesson on understanding these shapes. Okay, what I first want to talk about is the difference between a circle and a sphere. A circle is a shape, and a shape is simply a two-dimensional shape that can, and a two-dimensional part means it has two dimensions or two measurements we can take. It has height and width. So for the two dimensions, the 2D, we can measure height, we can measure width, and then we have the dimensions of it. This is about 2 inches by 2 inches. So we have those dimensions or those measurements. With a sphere, this is a three-dimensional object. If you form a sphere out of wood or clay or paper mache, whatever, we have 3 dimensions because we can take 3 measurements on this. 1, height and width. 2, 3, depth. So we have 1 measurement, the height, 2 measurement, width, 3 measurement, depth. How far back into space does it go? I can put my hands around this sphere. So what the artist has to do is the artist has to be able to create that form on a two-dimensional space. So I've got my paper here, it's just 2 dimensions. I can't go back into space. I can do the height, I can do the width, but there is no depth. So this is a 2-dimensional space. But I want to put a drawing of a 3-dimensional object onto this 2-dimensional space. So in order to do that, I have to do some shading and highlighting to create that illusion that I have a sphere sitting on a surface. And to do that, I'm going to use shading. So here we have on this artist has done this in pencil. And here we have the darkest part of the shadowing. Then we get lighter, lighter, lighter as we move toward the highlight. And the highlight is where the light source is hitting that object straight on. Because of that light, we also have a cast shadow. And that makes this form look like it's sitting on the surface. Just like if this sphere really was sitting on the surface, we would have a cast shadow, we would have highlights where the light's hitting it, and we would have shadows where it gets darker and lighter. So in order to do that, we've got to figure out how to use the shading. Another thing we have to use, another art technique that we will use will be contour lines. Contour lines are the lines that are the outline of a subject as well as the internal lines of a subject. So what we see is the internal contour lines that are creating the ridges of a pumpkin. You know how pumpkins have a ridge. They're not, you know, when we're little and we're making a pumpkin face, for a young person, say a primary or preschool person, we're going to learn how to do a circle or an oval, and then we're going to paint it orange and make our funny face on it, or just paint it orange and we have a pumpkin. But now, and those are shapes. But now we're going to learn how to make those shapes into a 3-dimensional object. Like these artists, these are all representational of a 3-dimensional object. This is a photograph. Again, this is a 3-dimensional object on a 2-dimensional space, just like a drawing is. It's a three-dimensional object on a two-dimensional space. To make that look real for the visual artist, not the photographer, we have to use our drawing skills to figure out how to make these shapes. How do we make this pumpkin section look puffy, where it's not just a flat oval shape? Okay. Let us stop the tape. You make sure you've got all of your stuff together and that you're ready to go. And then we're going to come back and make our pumpkin. Okay, I'm going to use a whiteboard briefly to show you what we're going to do today and how we're going to make this work. Okay. When we make our pumpkins, we're going to start out with an oval. From there, we're going to put inside contour lines. We're going to put it on a stem. And then we're going to go through and we're going to change these lines. The way we're going to do that is by making them more oval at the tops. So we're going to take each one of these lines and kind of puff them up. Then we'll erase our original lines. So it looks like we've got a real pumpkin. We're going to do the same thing on the bottom. We're going to go through, puff up these bottoms. And those are our internal contour lines that begin to create the three-dimensional form. With our stems, they're substantial. Pumpkins have substantial stems. And we're going to create those to also have a three-dimensional look by adding ovals and lines, outside contour lines, that show it growing in one direction or another. So those are the steps we're going to take. Okay. First thing we're going to do is we're going to stagger a little drawing composition of 3 different sized pumpkins in the middle of our paper. Doing so, this triangle that we will create makes a nice solid composition, and it will look best in the middle of the paper. If you wanted to move it to one side or the other, you could do that, but you would also want something over on the other side so that you would have enough balance to pull that off. So we're going to just start with 3 pumpkins. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is draw an oval. Now we want to make sure we leave enough room at the top. So if you came too close up to the top of your paper, lower your pumpkin. If your oval flattened out, fix it. Don't spend any time fiddling with erasers. A little bit of an erase is fine. Don't worry about every single mark because we're going to be erasing as we go. So there's my tall pumpkin. I have enough room at the bottom where I still can put a foreground in. I have enough room at the top where I can put a stem on it. Now my second pumpkin. It's my middle-sized pumpkin that's going to overlap this one. That's going to also create an illusion of space. And I'm going to erase that line so it looks like this pumpkin is sitting in front of that pumpkin. Then my middle pumpkin. I want it to be over both of these. It's going to be a squatty pumpkin. I still need to make sure I have enough space down here to create my foreground. Now I'm going to erase all these lines behind so I can see my pumpkins. Okay, I've got my tall pumpkin in the back, my middle pumpkin on the side, my squatty pumpkin in the front. Now when I get this pumpkin on here, I actually want this line to come out a little more, so I'm going to fix that right now. I want it to be a little bit fatter and come down a little bit more. So I'm going to fix that right now. So I've got more of the pumpkin shape I want. I want to start that way. Just draw lightly because you're going to be erasing. Okay, now I'm happier with that. Now I'm going to go through and start doing my lines. Before I do my internal contour lines, I want to go ahead and figure out what I'm going to do with my stems. So this stem, I think my perspective, I'm kind of looking straight at or kind of looking up maybe at this pumpkin. So I'm going to do his stem that direction. Put an oval so it looks like it's been chopped off. This pumpkin is the same. I'm kind of looking up at it because it's a little bit taller. Maybe I want to make its stem a little more substantial. You know, sometimes those stems can be longer. Erase these outside lines. That oval's a little big. Okay, that's where I'm at. And then the squatty guy, I'm going to rotate him forward a little bit where it looks like I'm kind of looking more down on him because he's shorter. So his oval for his stem is going to start right about here. I'm going to come down, that's about 1 finger width. And his stem and I'm going to erase back here and erase that. So now his stem, let me get this up here so you can see. So we can see all of this. So we're going to wrap it around like that, okay? And get rid of that little spot. Okay, let me get rid of this over here too. It's messy. Actually, I think this oval needs to actually be a little bigger. Okay, there we go, that's better. Now we're gonna do the interior contour lines that are gonna create the ridges. And our first stab at this is gonna be just making an oval in the middle of each pumpkin. This one would end because we can't see beyond it. Another contour line, another contour line. And we're just going to keep doing this. Now, while you are making your lines, make sure you stop the tape so you can get your lines where you want them. And this guy down here, we're going to start our oval here. Now this way, come around here. Okay, so now we've got, do a little one right there. Now we've got our initial contour lines, but this is where we're going to now go through and puff them all up a little bit. So I'm going to start on this one, go up beyond my original line. Next, go up, puff it up like you're puffing it up with some air. Up, puff this one up, this one. Now I can go in and erase those original lines. This is why I say don't press down too terribly hard. I'm pressing down a little harder because I want to make sure you can see this on the videotape. Now we're going to go to the next one. We're going to puff up this middle guy. The next line, the next line. Erase originals. Make sure you stop the tape so that you can stay, so I don't get too far ahead of you, and I don't want you to hurry. That's not the idea of this. I want you to get it right. Okay, this guy, we can see the bottom. So we want to do the same thing with the bottom sections. We're going to puff them up. Erase our original lines. Smooth these out if you need to. I usually need to. And now this guy. We're going to start with exactly the same thing. Puff it up. Puff this one. And now do the outsides. So it looks like a real pumpkin. And you know, pumpkins are not perfectly smooth, so you really kind of don't want your lines to be too perfect. It's kind of one of the nice things about drawing from nature is that nature isn't perfect, and sometimes a little bit of a wonky looking line looks a lot better than a perfect line. Because you don't want it to look like it's machine made. Okay, now I got to do this to get that to look right. So now what you want to do is just kind of go through and fine tune. Okay, there's my pumpkin. Alrighty. Mine are moved over a little bit on my paper, which means I'm going to need to put more substantial background over here and foreground. I think what I will do is put some longer grass over on this side to help balance it. Okay, and that's something that we do with art. Art is always a matter of problem solving. That's why I tell my students over and over and over and over, you are problem solving. One step leads to a problem that always has to be solved. That's why artists have such an advantage over other people, especially like at school or just at work, life in general. Artists always have one step up because they have the ability to think quickly on their feet and correct as they go. They pivot. An artist has to be able to pivot because there is no one straight line answer to whatever it is that you are trying to resolve. Just like someone writing a song, music, same exact thing. Every step requires the artist to make a decision based on the last step, not based on what a book says about going from point A to point B. Okay, so now we're going to take our oil pastels and we're going to create our lines. So stop the tape if you need to, get caught up, get your oil pastel or your black crayon out if you're using these materials, and we're going to move on from there. Okay, here we are. We are going to now create our cover, basically, I should say, the lines that we created with oil pastel. So the way I want you to do this is oil pastel is a very messy, well, any wet product can be very messy. So what I want you to do is to be thinking about this ahead of time. I want my art students to be thinking ahead of time and planning how to take care of my materials. How do I take care of my piece of art that I am creating? If I put oil pastel down here on this bottom pumpkin first, my hand is going to smear across that every single time I move. So I don't want to start down here. I'm right-handed. So what I want to do is start the farthest away from this hand and at the top so that I can work towards the left and towards the bottom. So if you are right-handed, you're going to start on your large pumpkin because it's the farthest away from you. Right-handed people are going to do the large pumpkin, then they're going to come over and do the medium-sized pumpkin, and they're going to leave the squatty pumpkin for last. So right-handed people, you will start on large, move to medium, go to squatty. If you are left-handed, you're going to come from the opposite direction, but pumpkins are going to be in different order. You're going to start over here on the left. So you're going to start on the middle pumpkin. Then you're going to go to the large pumpkin because you want to start over here so that you're not smearing this direction from left to right. And so you're going to start on the medium, then you're going to go to the top of the page, do the large pumpkin, and then do the squatty pumpkin. So left-handed, you're going to do medium, large, squatty. Medium, large, squatty for left-handed. Right-handed, large, medium, squatty. Okay, let's start. And I'm going to start on this outside line too because that's the line farthest away. I don't want to start on this line because I could very easily smear that. So I'm going to start over here. Now, you see where I missed the line? Let me show you. And there's pencil. I got to leave that because if I would have to be very careful to be able to erase that because this oil pastel will smear. I'm going to leave it and paint over it. And so what you're going to do now is simply go over all of your pencil lines with oil pastel or crayon. If you're using colored pencils, you would want to use your black and kind of darken these down. There is my large. Now I'm going to do the same with my medium. Start over here. Keep my hand out of making a mess. And you can see this process goes really quickly. Make sure to turn the tape off though to get caught up with me, and I don't want you to hurry through this. I'm going to start with my stem on this guy. Try to keep my hand out of it. Back here. Get up there. Now, I'm in a really precarious little spot right here. I don't want to touch the bottom part of this pumpkin. So I need to keep my hand up. I'm going to brace myself with a finger, maybe even 2 fingers, to hold me in place. Now I'm on just my pinky. Now I lift up. There we go. Okay. So now, whoops, there's one little spot. I'm going to brace my finger up on my pinky in a clean area, and because I want to get that rounded back part of this stem on this squatty guy. Okay. So now we have our outline and interior ridges created with our oil pastels. So we've got our contour lines are obvious. the outside contour lines and the inside contour lines that show us the shape of these segments. All right, now we're going to mix up some paint. I do not have orange, intentionally. I do not have orange. But what I will do is I will be mixing my yellow and red. We're going to go through and do this in stages. We're going to first do the 3 middle sections with a pretty much almost pure yellow. We're going to put a little bit of red in it to make it a very light yellow-orange. But then as we go around the sections of pumpkin, to make it look like it is a sphere going around, the way we're going to do our shading is through darkening our orange. We'll go from a yellow-orange to a much darker red-orange. By the time we get to the sides and the back is going to be very dark, mostly red. We'll start off with mostly yellow and end up with mostly red. Okay, now to charge your watercolor paints, you can do it 2 different ways. You can dip water onto each one, but your watercolors or your tempera cakes need to be wet before you start using them. You don't start using them dry. You need to dampen everything. So you can either do it that way, or what I have my students use in the studio is a spray bottle. So I just go through. I'm being very dangerous here doing this over my art. I gotta be careful. I wouldn't tell my students to do this, but it's the only way to get the camera to work. I'm not the best videotaper, trust me. Okay, now everything is nice and wet. So now we're gonna let that sit there for a second and charge and get soaked down in. And then we're going to start mixing up our paint. So we're gonna start with the yellow. And if you notice, my palette is pretty messy. That's because I wiped these paper plates out and we reuse them. There's absolutely no reason to throw it away until it just simply cannot be used anymore. And that at that point, we will throw them away. For myself, I use reusable palettes. But for my students, we don't have enough reusable ones. Okay, here's my yellow. I'm going to put just a touch of red in it and make a very light orange. So now let me try this. Oh, I'm also using my round brush. Forgot to mention that. Now, I want to make my strokes up and down so that when they dry, if there's anything noticeable, any lines noticeable, I want them going up and down vertically so that it mimics the lines of a pumpkin. Those vertical ridges going up and down. This is not painting a wall. You don't want it to be perfectly smooth. You want the beauty of the water-based media to come through. So the watercolor media should have some nice lines so that it has a nice painterly look to it. Painterly, that's a word I use a lot with my students, a painterly look. You want that painterly look. Okay, so there's my middle sections. Now I'm going to make a little bit of a deeper orange. I'm going to put some water on my palette. I'm going to try to pick up as much yellow as I can. Not always easy to do. Mixing tempera paint is not always an easy process. Now I'm going to pick up some more red and get it a little darker. Okay, there we go. I think that'll work. Now I'm going to paint this section. Yep, that's a good color. Now, see how that just bled in? I touched on the other side. That's okay. What I'm going to do, though, is grab my other brush that doesn't have any paint on it, get it wet, and what I want to do is just kind of blend that in. There. So it doesn't look like it was an accident. So it looks like it was supposed to do that. Again, problem solving artists, that you've got to be able to problem solve as you go. Up and down. This has a couple little dots down here that may settle okay, or it may look blotchy. So I'm going to move that one up and move that one up, so that when that dries, it doesn't dry like a round puddle. It dries more like a vertical line that's part of the structure of a pumpkin. Now we'll move over to the medium guy. I keep touching over there. Now, I've got a little bit of a puddle happening. I want to show you how to fix that. Dry your brush so that it's just damp and not dripping. Go through and lay that brush in the puddle while it's still wet. And go through and you can pick up a lot of the puddling so that it will dry a little nicer. You got to do that when it's wet though, otherwise it can leave a really dry looking mark behind it and then it doesn't look that great. Okay, now this guy needs to be darker. So I picked up a little more of my orange. Oop, need more than that. Get down here on the bottom of this guy so that the bottom is a little darker. It's fine for it to be lighter here because that's part of our shading technique that we're using. Okay, now I'll do this guy, the squatty guy. The squatty guy has more sections that are visible. So he will, or she will, need to have a few more shades of orange applied. Okay, so now we have our next step of orange put on. For my squatty guy, I want to put a little more red for it and get these two sections on it that these two sections don't have. So we're going to do this one next. I've got enough orange paint for those two, so I'm just going to pick up some red and add to it. And do these sections. I'm painting with the direction of the sections so that it will look, so that those will dry vertically. Dried my brush off. I'm going to pick up some puddles that are happening. Dry, pick up some more. Got a puddle happening over here. Pick up that. I'm going to pull my brush up with the direction of the pumpkin section so that when this dries, I don't want it to dry with paint going horizontally the opposite way, because then it'll look, the marks will not look right. Okay. Now we need to get this a little darker. Let me get some more red. I have to be careful now that I don't drag across this wet pumpkin. So I have to really hold my arm up and off. There's another technique that I'll show you you can use by using, say, a ruler or any kind of a stick thing. You can put it down on a clean part of your painting and then rest your hand on that so that you have some stability and not just holding your hand up in midair. called a bridge. Okay, now for these back sections of this pumpkin, I want to make it look like the sun is, or the light source is hitting the top of this, because if the light source is hitting here, it's going to be hitting right here and here too. So I'm going to rinse my brush, and I'm going to go back and pick up a little bit of yellow for right there. Just pure yellow on my brush. And I'm going to hit these little areas that could have shade from the stem, so I think I'm going to skip that one. Kind of depends on what your own looks like. I'm going to hit part of that with a highlight. Now I'm going to go back, and the light would not go from highlight to dark. It would go from highlight to the next step, just like here, highlight to the next step. So I want to pick up some of my lighter orange from my palette and very gently blend those two together. Now, this guy back here. Oh, first let me show you something I need to do. You see those little white sections? I want to fix those before they get too dry. So I'm going to just get some water on my brush, not too much, and I'm just going to kind of touch where those are, and it will, the water will, the pigment in the paint will be attracted to the molecules in the water and happily go to it. But what you don't really want to do is leave white paper showing for this. Sometimes we do, but not for something like this. You'd want to kind of cover all those with paint. Okay, the best you can. I mean, sometimes it's, you got to leave a few little spots because you just can't get to them. Alrighty, now for this guy that I'm going to pretend like is in the shade, I'm going to use a little bit of a neutral that I make. A neutral would be darker, and I'm going to make it using the complementary colors of orange. The complementary color of orange, which is blue. Since I have orange here, if I add blue to it, it's going to make a neutral. Orange and blue make a neutral. Red and green make a neutral. So whatever color you're using, just put its complementary mixed with it, and you'll have a neutral that will always work with those colors. Okay, I don't want this to be too wet, so I'm going to just kind of dry my brush a little bit, because I have such a small section. Well, that's not enough. There we go. Kind of touch it. Okay. Tiny bit over there. Alrighty, now, the next thing we're going to do are our stems. And we're going to, again, use a neutral, and I'm going to add a little green to the neutral so it looks a little bit more realistic. I'm going to pick up some blue, mix it with our orange, then pick up a little bit of green and mix with it. So it has a little bit of a green, it's a little bit of a green color. So I'm going to put my stems on. I'm going to go up and down vertically because that's how they grow. Circular there. And we're going to darken these in a minute. We're going to do a little bit of a dry on dry, as long as this, or wet on dry, as long as this dries properly. The techniques we're using are wet on dry because the paper is dry and the paint is wet. When we go back into these areas to make some sections darker, like we did right here, where we're blending those together, that's more of a wet on wet technique because the paper's pretty wet and we're blending paint into it. So that's more of a wet on wet. But the majority of this painting is wet on dry. Okay, what do we need to do now? Let me grab, this is kind of wet. I would like it to be drier. I'm afraid if I put my fan on, it's gonna interfere with the sound. At home, what you can do is stop the tape at this point and take your painting into a bathroom and use a hair blow dryer on it and dry your paint. For us, for today though, I'm gonna have to work with this being a little wetter than I would want to. We don't want it bone dry, like I don't want you to go sit your painting and let it dry for the next, week. So I don't want it bone dry, but we don't want the puddles, basically. All right, we're gonna keep using this original water. We have not changed our water yet. We will change our water after we finish the pumpkins. We're gonna change our water to the cleaner water. So right now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to make a little more of my neutral. I've now got my flat brush. I'm gonna make a little more neutral so that I can do a little bit of shading. And I wanna squeeze some of this paint out of my brush so that I have it to use. Okay, nice. And what we're gonna do now is create a little bit of, we talked about those darker shadows where it goes from darker to lighter. I'm gonna use this brush to just create right next to this black contour line. I wanna create what would be kind of just a cast shadow from the ridge. Need to be using 2 brushes to make this happen though. So I want to kind of dry off my round brush so that I can get rid of this line. We don't want a real rigid line right here. Let me show you the example of what I'm talking about. This shadowing is a very gradual gradation of pencil. So you don't see a line. Here you see a line. Where we see the background and the table, you see a line. We don't want that on here because that little ridge is just a light little ridge. We just want to make it look like it's going down in. We want to create the illusion that these ridges are going down in. So we don't want anything that's really dark. We don't want anything that's a real dark line. We want to kind of break any of those lines up very gently though. This isn't the kind of process that you're going to do with any rough painting. You're going to be very kind of gentle. Okay, well, I just got paint everywhere. Let me get my little rag here. Okay, now I turned my painting upside down. I want you to always remember you can turn your stuff upside down. I do try to get my students to do that and not be stubborn with moving their paintings around because you want to get it to where it is the easiest for you to reach to. Now I'm going to switch brushes with my cleaner, rounder one and just kind of gently, without removing my orange. Dry my brush, get a tiny bit more of the dark neutral, and I'm just going to go along all the very little edges. Not a lot. Switch brushes, pick up that edge. Edge right there, get rid of that, get rid of that. Okay, now I think I'm going to turn my painting back around. Okay, I like that guy, he's doing well. Now I'm going to do my little ridges in that top stem. So I'm going to rinse off my round brush, pick up my neutral, and I just want to make some ridges going up. Just some lines. I'm going to pick up some neutral, and I'm going to do this guy too, since he's up here. I can reach him. and just hit some lines going that direction. Okay, I'm gonna rinse my brush so I got it cleaner again. I'm gonna go back, pick up a neutral, and start my process again of shading. I need to make a little more neutral. Okay. Clean round brush, break up the edge. Flat brush, round brush, flat brush, switch to the round, break up this line. Okay, let's go down here now. Clean my brush. Clean it so I can pick up more of that. Okay, back here. Then I want to put, I'm using my round brush now, I'm picking up a little more of my neutral so I can get some ridges on this guy and to get down in here around the base. Actually, I want that to be a little darker, so I'm going to pick up a little more blue to get down in there, to make that base look like it's further down in, and break up the tops of these stems too. Okay. There we have our pumpkins. Now we're going to work on our background. Now what I want you to do is stop the tape, get caught up with me so that your pumpkins are to this point. I see a little bit of a line I still need to break up. And we're going to go on now to we're going to switch to our clean water. Get my brushes cleaned off in this dirty water and put them over in the clean water. And now we're going to start working on our background. So stop the tape, get yourself caught up with me, and then come back and we'll finish up our background, foreground and background. Okay? Okay. Now I'm going to kind of switch my stuff around so it's not quite so wet. My paper towels were soaking, so I turned those over. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this background. And let me show you some examples. Here is one where we did purple over to one side, blue over to one side, green across the bottom. So we have the warm colors of the pumpkins, the yellow, orange, and red in the middle. And in order to make those really pop out, we're going to use cool colors behind it so that they stand out more. There's actually a science behind color. You don't have to, just like a chef does not have to have a good sense of taste, they just have to know what spices do react in whatever way in a dish they're making. They don't have to even be able to taste it. They just have to know what works, the science behind it. And the same thing goes with color. There's science behind it. So we're going to do this scientifically. We have warm colors on our pumpkins. The warm colors are yellow, red, orange. Think about the colors that you see in fire. Cool colors are purple, blue, green. So the way I explain it to my students is think of the things that are cool. If you're on a hot summer day, maybe the blue of a swimming pool or the ocean when you jump in, laying in the nice cool green grass, or a purple popsicle. So think of the things that are cool when you're hot. Purple, blue, green. So if we use those cool colors behind the hot colors or next to the hot colors, it makes those hot colors pop. Okay, so here is another one. Again with cool colors. Blue was used across the top. Then a neutral was made for the middle ground, and then for the foreground, again, green for grass. So you can use whatever colors you want for this. And if you wanted to make this look like more like it was sitting in a field, you could do a neutral across the bottom with maybe a little bit of green and maybe a blue sky behind it where it looks like it's actually sitting in a pumpkin patch. You can do that too. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make mine look more like it is just sitting in a grassy patch with a blue sky behind it, okay? And we're going to use a method of painting with water-based paints that's called scumbling. Scumbling is where you simply are going to be going back and forth different directions with your brush to scumble in your paint, as opposed to painting like this, like you were painting a wall. We don't paint like that. We're going to scumble this in. Scumbling means one thing with water-based paints and another thing with oil-based paint. So when I do an oil painting, if I'm doing scumbling, it's a different technique. I wish that wasn't true, but it is. I wish they would have meant the same thing. Scumbling in oil paint is more like glazing in water-based paint. Glazing in water-based paint is where you've got, if we wanted to add a layer of yellow over this red, we could put some yellow over it and you'd be able to have a little bit of orange show through because of the light shining through and mixing the two colors. So for scumbling for water-based paint, this is the way we're going to put in our background, foreground, and middle ground. Okay, so I'm going to use my flat brush and I'm going to start up here with the sky. And what I want you to do is watch how I will be automatically turning my paper so that I can reach areas without reaching over my painting, because every time you reach over with another color paint, you have the chance of spilling on your artwork. So you want to kind of keep that drippy paint away from your artwork, because you worked hard to get to this point. The last thing you want to do is blop it all up with a big glop of green right in the middle of your yellow, and that would be hard to get rid of. Okay, so we're going to start with the blue, and so I'm going to start by turning my paper over. I'm going to start my blue right here kind of in the middle ground, because I'm going to blend the two together. I don't want a sharp line. I want to blend the two together. So I'm going to start here. I will be automatically moving my brush different directions, and what I would like for you to do is to watch me do this first before you do it, so that you can kind of watch me move my brush around, because I will automatically be, without even thinking, I will automatically be putting my brush to reach what I want to reach without hitting something I don't want to hit. So when I I already know when I do the edges of this pumpkin, I'm going to come at it like this. I'm not going to do this because when you press the brush down, it can smear paint over the edge, and I could end up pushing paint into my red, and I don't want my blue into my red. It can happen accidentally no matter what you do. And that could still happen, but I want to make sure that I'm doing whatever I can do to keep that from happening. So I'd like you to watch me do this first, then you do your background. You can replay the tape so that you can work with me, but I would like for you to watch me first. So I'm going to wet my brush, I'm going to grab some blue, and I'm going to start scumbling in my background. So scumbling is just kind of going back and forth, different directions. I don't want my paintbrush to just go one direction, because then I won't have pretty painterly marks. I'll have messy streaks. You don't want streaks, you want painterly marks. So that's why we're going to scumble in this background, so that we can keep it out of our art. And keep it from looking too streaked. Okay, I got paint on there right there. All right. Now I got to get down in here. So I've got my paintbrush up on edge to get down in that little tiny spot. What I don't want to do is just leave something like that, because that'll dry and just look smeary. So you want to move kind of quickly so that the paint does not have a chance to dry and make streaky marks. So you have to kind of be looking all over the place, all at the same time, looking for streaks, looking for puddles. You don't want either. Now what I'm going to do is I want to break up my blue a little bit so that I'm not working too flatly across the back. I'm going to quickly grab some red, blue, and mix in a little bit of purple right here, just to break up that blue. Rinse my brush. Now I'm going to pick up blue again and scumble all of this in. What I don't want to do, and I don't want you to do this, see how you leave all those zigzaggy marks? That's not painterly, that's messy. Okay, now I got to go back and fix some problems I have here. I got paint here. Got to mix that in. There. Got some paint here. Clean wet brush, blend these in. Okay, now I want to get my grass in. So now I'm going to go down to my green, over to green I should say. Grab my green. I'm going to start here, across the bottom, move up here, and I want to scumble this into the wet area of blue. I don't want that blue to get too dry. And I don't want my green to be too wet because I want to put a little bit of wet on dry on top of this green. And make a few little longer pieces of grass. So I'm going to get rid of all streaky stuff. That blended up in there nicely. Okay, a little more green. You need to work quickly and constantly be looking for puddles that need to be cleaned up as you go. You're scumbling many different directions quickly. Okay, so, and I blended my background with my middle ground and foreground. That's all blended nicely together so I don't have a straight, stiff line. I want it to look more natural. Okay, so now I want to go back in right up through here. It's a little bit dark. I want to put in a little purple while it's still wet enough for this to work. Okay, enough water, a little bit of purple, and I'm going to move in over the top of that just to break that up a little bit of just that blue. I'm now holding my brush like this. I've been painting for 59 years. So a lot of the times I forget to mention what I'm doing because it's just such an automatic process for me. My brain doesn't even recognize what I'm doing. I'm just doing it. Okay, now I'm going to make some little kind of pieces of grass. Now to make them look more natural, I'm not going to just take green. I'm going to take a neutral of green. So I'm going to take green, put it in my palette, and pick up a little bit of red. Actually, I can use this red that's on the palette. I'll just reconstitute it. Move that right over there. And I got a neutral. So now, up on the tip, using the edge of my brush, the tip or the toe, a brush actually has a toe, that's the toe of the brush. I'm going to make a few little streaks. Now I'm not going to leave it like this. I'm going to rinse my brush. Now I'm going to grab just green and blend in some little grassy areas. And I want those grassy areas to come up over the edge of my pumpkin too. So I'm going to grab some green, grab some neutral, and bring it up a little bit. Because I want it to look like it really is sitting out in a grassy spot. Maybe they're waiting to be carved or made into pie. I don't know. Okay. Now I want to kind of model or scumble that together so that I don't have a real distinct section of grass. So I'm going to just take my brush, I'm holding it by the side, and I'm going to just kind of break up the grass. That needs a little more water over here. Not too much though. And what I don't really want to do is hit the bottom of my pumpkins with a lot of water. I want to be careful about that. Okay, the last thing we can do is let's grab a little bit of the neutral you have, and I'm just going to throw a little bit underneath like this so it looks like we've got a little bit of a cast shadow. Not much. The sun's hitting them from the front, so there's not going to be much of a shadow. There will be some very light shadow right at the base, but that's really it. Okay. I don't like how those big wide pieces of grass right there, so I'm going to dry my brush and just gently break them up. Okay. I think that's it. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed doing this. I would love to be able to see pictures of anything that you do, so